But I think the most, the biggest challenge and the most interesting part, I guess, of workshopping us as characters and what is our stage presence has been in the last several months of creating and launching a live stream series called JaNae, which happens on about one Saturday per month, and we're going to boot it back up in January in tandem with the release of the album. But the live streaming space has become this really intimate, performative space where we've been interacting with people who have been attending our shows, engaging with us in the chat, writing songs on the spot based on audience members' suggestions, and then putting our own spin on it, both as musicians and also what would the artist JaNae say, or how would the artist BLIZZLE rap this? And so it's kind of become, and again, it's still evolving. There's like a layer of improvisational comedy to it, but it's also, this really intimate situational space where we're really able to speak with, engage with our fans, our friends, our family members who have been awesome and come to our shows.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So I want to talk about what it's been like as an artist during 2020. And I was fortunate enough to spend time with both of you and Sully and Nathan in your studio right before I feel like the world fell apart. It was like the last conference I went to when I was in Chicago, and I got to hang out with you guys. It was awesome. And then suddenly, everything changes. So I know both of you were diagnosed with having COVID or very early on. So what was that like when you got that diagnosis? What did it feel like? How did you know suddenly you were, feeling off? And then how did you deal with that in the early days of COVID when everyone was just trying to figure out like what the hell is going on?
Well, I can speak to the more technical side of that. It was like, sure. There was, we were very early, and that's because we pretty sure, never know, but I work in like international events and stuff, and we'll do that type of project management. And so we're pretty sure that's where we contracted it. I was at an event where 6 people flew back to France and then were positive. So probably that's where I got it. Anyway, the interesting piece of it was, for me, was sort of, we were trying to figure out, like, are we sick or not? And so, like, should we go to the doctor and get tested, while there was a fair amount of information that was saying this isn't real and it's just on the East Coast, or it's just on a boat off the West Coast or something. It was just, that was a very existential, odd, like, what is going on? Like, is there a way I have this? Like, clearly there is, because I was at an event where a bunch of people had it. So we had to deal with that, and I think JaNae can talk more about the emotional side of it. But the result of that was actually a lot of phone calls from health officials trying to figure out what was going on, which was nuts. I don't know how they got my cell phone number, but it was being passed around. I kid you not. I talked to people at the CDC. I talked to people at the epidemiologist center in Illinois or something, like the department. They called me several times to ask, like, how are you feeling? Where did you go? And I'm like, how do you guys even have, who is this? And the hospitals had no protocols. Like, we just walked in and we're like, hey. So there was definitely confusion. And then we had to let everyone we were around know once we got positive tests, and that produced a lot of stress and, that issue. Being sort of patient zero meant that as we were getting these weird random calls from health people and hospitals and so forth, trying to figure out, like, well, who have you been around? We were also getting, obviously, as should anyone who is sick, a lot of calls from family members and stuff, and people trying to figure out what was going on, and people who were very worried. So that adds to stress and adds to anxiety. And maybe we'll come back around, but during that time period, we then wrote an entire album that is technically JaNae, but it's a very different experience. And we're working on that for a release maybe later in 2021 or something.
Yeah. I mean, you asked sort of what was it like as artists, and I think there was this sort of like cloud of doom, like going over the entire events, music, anything live industry that everyone was sensing back even in early March when we played, before we were sick or anything, several weeks, we played a show with probably, 30 other Chicago musicians in this sort of micro festival. And it was interesting because as we were getting there, we were talking to some of the artists and they're like, dude, I'm only bringing my own microphones to any show I ever perform in the future. Like there was this sort of like strange feeling around the whole thing. And it was almost as though like you could implicitly feel that all of the artists had this feeling of this could be the last show we play for a long time.
And
it was. But to speak sort of to the emotional challenges of, after we found out that we were tested positive, it was this really emotional experience for me. I had a lot of anxiety every day waking up and not really feeling like there was anyone, I could talk to about. And this is really the first time I'm even really publicly talking about the experience. So I appreciate you asking about our comfortability level on all of this. Because it has been really sensitive. It's become politicized, all of that. But for me, the personal struggle was just dealing with the anxiety of not knowing what's next. And luckily, I have a really supportive family who both Ryan and I were able to call family members and talk to them. My uncle is a biologist and is very closely studying the virus in Michigan and has been since the very start. So there were some really excellent conversations with my uncle Chris about the situation. And then I guess there's sort of two sides to this. A lot of times when artists are experiencing anxiety or depression or feeling really down, which is, sort of a common theme for many musical artists, many visual artists who sort of, will produce or create art directly addresses these emotions or these feelings. For me, being able to start to channel that anxiety into future thinking projects, saying like, no, we're going to do this. We're going to move forward. It's going to be okay. And, having Ryan around to say like, no, it's fine. We're doing great. We're going to keep getting better. Even though we both had fevers for 20 days, it's like, nope, it's just another day. We're going to keep moving forward. And I remember, checking my phone, not so much for like the news because I couldn't look at it for probably a month and a half, but specifically like sort of awkwardly stalking Tom Hanks and his wife, being like, if Tom Hanks can make it through this right now, I can too. If Rita can like make these singing videos and post them online and she's making it through, we can do it too. And they're my parents' age. Like, thank you, Tom Hanks, for being that. But I guess a couple of things came out of this from Ryan and my conversations while we were sick and while we were in the recovery process and feeling the lingering effects of the illness even after the fact. And those were, as Ryan mentioned, this Ambient album, which we wrote probably 7 days into the fever, 7 days into the sickness, which was an experience where we both sat down and opened up an iPad with some really awesome synthesizer sounds, opened up the recording studio, played notes, and started creating these layers just sort of intuitively of what we were feeling or what sounds sonically fit the palette of those, anxious emotions. The other thing that came out of it creatively, specifically, is a song that I wrote during that time called Flood My Body, which is actually based off one of the conversations that I had with my uncle where he was saying, somewhere between 14 days of having a fever and 21 days of having a fever. Somewhere in there, the antibodies are going to come in and flood your body and like get this thing out. And for whatever reason, that metaphor or that idea of the antibodies just like being this amazing, like these warriors that are coming through, flooding your body. Like there's sort of like a biblical feeling to it, as well as like an empowerment sort of aspect. I wrote a song based on what he said called Flood My Body. And it's written to anyone or everyone who is recovering from the virus and experiencing those feelings of questioning whether or not their body can fight this thing that's taking over. And so it's one of the more emotional JaNae songs that is, you know, very much in a more serious perspective as opposed to an absurdist perspective. But I think that the song to me really embodies a lot of those feelings and that the hope to keep moving forward and the promise of the body being this amazing thing that can win over the thing. So yeah. And then of course, on top of all of that, we had time at home to really plan out what Saturday and what a live stream might look like for us. So that was also really empowering and inspiring, even while we were sick.
Yeah. Has JaNae, your persona, changed? Like, did COVID change JaNae or evolve the persona in any way?
That's a really good question. I haven't really thought about it, but I would say, yeah, I think that the music that you'll hear on the album, the music that you'll hear in the single, the Ambient Album, I think is a lot more vulnerable than some of the other performances or some of the other songs and the lyrics, which have sort of taken the JaNae persona outside of the world or as an observer more than a participant in some ways. And so I definitely think I'll have to think about that one a little bit more, but I definitely think that there's a vulnerability side.
Yeah.
That's come out of it.
Okay. So let's talk about then, I guess, creating music and art during COVID. So post your experience, you know, all this summer, everything's been closed. There are no live events happening right now. So you mentioned briefly about some of your live streams, but how have you evolved your marketing, your business plans, your, you know, just music release for JaNae in a world now where live music is no longer an option? At least, sorry, live in-person music.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think a big part of that is that not that much changed, really, in that the outreach and stuff through things like social media and talking to people who are involved in the industry, like that stuff still exists. And I think as an artist, you know, there was definitely some weeks where we were not involved in any way promoting things and recovering and sleeping. But I think some of that stuff all stays the same. And what's wonderful about the age we now live in is once we realized, oh, we can just sort of transition and put together the show we want to do in the studio we have, going back to where we started this conversation, it took me about 2 weeks to, I won't turn the camera, but there's a lot of other equipment kind of stacked up that allows us to do live streaming from within a recording studio with another computer hooked into the studio's computer. So for me, at least, I just was like, oh, I can focus on this task and put together a live show that I think is awesome. Saturday is really cool. And so that's kind of where my headspace went. And I don't take on the meat of the marketing side of it and the outreach, but I do like to put a goal out front and then pursue it to the extreme, thus interactive shows in theaters and stuff, like on no budgets and whatever. So I enjoy that process of just like, we're going to make this happen. And the live stream was an opportunity to do that that there is no way we would have done without the situation of COVID and shutting down all these clubs. And now we have this completely other